friends. So during the Christmas break, I was scrolling through social media and I noticed a meme that was shared by a couple of different people. It was this silhouette of a generic person with a heart. It started out larger on the left and it went progressively smaller as the person got bigger on the right side until it was representative of a fully grown adult. The caption simply said, "Disappointments change people." It made me stop and think about that for a minute because, strangely enough, this was something that I was just talking about randomly a couple of weeks prior. I was talking about how I, personally, had spent so much of my adult life investing in other people who, in the end, proved to be a terrible return on that investment, for lack of a better term. It's funny how so often when those things are happening, even if you're told by other people to have caution, or even if you know yourself on some level that something is not quite right in a situation, that most people will typically change nothing. They will stay the course only to end up disappointed that people turned out to be exactly who others told you that they were, or exactly who you hoped they were not. If this has been you a couple of times, or hell, even a lot of times, don't worry, you are not alone. I can relate, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, specifically why we do things like this, why we so freely participate in our own heartbreak so often when there were signs warning you that it was likely to happen all over the place. I don't know that I have a great answer, sorry to say, but I do know that part of the reason is that as human beings, we always want to look for the good in others. We want to think that people who we treat well will do the same for us. We want to believe that people who we love, that perhaps we know for a long time or extremely well, are never going to be the ones who betray us. We want to think that maybe if we just keep doing and giving and forgiving and taking on baggage that isn't even really ours to carry, that the person that we're doing that for will see us and then return the favor, for lack of a better term. And when that doesn't happen, we're deeply, deeply disappointed. When it happens to us more times than not over an extended period of time, that disappointment only grows. When it happens to us with multiple people over time, it is super easy to become bitter and jaded and just want to give up on people in general. So yeah, while I agree with the general sentiment of this meme, that disappointments do change you, I think there's a little more to it than that. When you are a good person, someone who is kind and patient and understanding and empathetic, it can sometimes be both a blessing and a curse. Because sure, you're good to people, but you tend to be good to everyone, even people who are a-holes too, who don't really deserve that. And look, while all of those things are really just part of being that good person and taking the high road, it doesn't mean that it stings any less when something happens and you realize that you have been let down in some way. It still hurts whether you did the right thing or not. And that is super hard to reconcile. It can make us water down our responses to betrayals and misdeeds by other people, allowing them to still feel like they have an in to you or some leverage. What I mean here is, for example, you may have a close relationship with someone who will betray you in some way, and you will have a falling out over it. Years later, when you have had some time and space, they may come back around and apologize or try to reconnect with you, and they try to demonstrate to you that they have changed or they've grown up, etc. So you decide to let your guard down and let them back in, so to speak, only to find out shortly thereafter that they haven't actually changed at all. They're still the same a-hole they were before, just older and maybe more creative at hiding it now. So what happens then? Well, I can tell you what should happen. You should push them right back out the door they came from, and then nail that sucker shut. Forget the concept of closure, friends. That is one of the biggest lies you will ever tell yourself and others. It's right up there with the check is in the mail. Some real talk, closure is a myth. The only real closure that you need and that you should ever seek is the one that you give to yourself. Trying to get it from others is just giving them more control. It makes your healing process dependent on them. They cannot give that to you no matter what they say or do. Sorry. Ask me how I know. Seriously. Because this is a lesson that I had to learn in a very difficult and painful way. So anyway, all this to say, when you suffer a betrayal, especially a large one, of course you're going to be disappointed. Of course you will want to be cautious. Of course you will want to not make that same mistake again. But does that mean that it has to change you permanently? In some cases, it might, and honestly, it should. When you are in, say, a relationship where you shared finances and the other person cleaned out your bank account to book themselves a vacation with someone else they were trying to get with, you will be understandably very cautious about giving future partners that kind of access to your bank account. When someone has betrayed your confidence and you thought you knew that person very well, you will be understandably wary of trusting others or being vulnerable around anyone. When you set expectations in a friendship and that person consistently doesn't show up for you or always lets you down, of course you are not going to be willing to go out of your way for them anymore. This is all very human nature, basic self-preservation stuff. And honestly, it's probably what you need to do when you're healing. But does this mean that this is who you are forever? Does this mean that when your heart shrank several sizes, much like the Grinch, that this is just how things are going to be forever and for everyone? Of course not. I mean, if you know the story of the Grinch, then you know that he didn't actually hate Christmas. He hated people because they were pretty awful to him his whole life. He was bullied mercilessly for his looks. So, I mean, can you blame the guy? If you know his story, then you also know the moral of it. And that is that if you're hurt, that does not mean that you have blanket permission to hurt others. And there is no doubt that sometimes we do hurt others who have nothing to do with our pain because someone else hurt us first. So, again, yeah, disappointment can definitely change us, but it can also motivate us to make change, to grow and be more resilient, to not be careless with important things like our trust, and to manage our expectations. I saved that one for last, not because it's least, by the way. It's because having expectations are one of the ways that we can often break our own hearts the most. And while there are many which are very reasonable and even standard, so to speak, in any relationship, sometimes we set some of them a little too high, and that is not something that we can really blame on other people, especially when we set them and then we don't even tell that person specifically what they are. It's almost like sitting down at a restaurant and not ordering anything or even acknowledging the server, but then getting mad at that server for not bringing us any food. You know what I mean? One thing I want to say too about disappointments is that it is actually not only the big ones that really work to try to change us. Sometimes it's relatively small ones or even a series of small ones. Those are probably the trickiest ones because when things pile up, like disappointments tend to do, it can be very hard to dig out from under that. It can feel like even those little things are big things. There is no one-size-fits-all advice that I can really give you there. And I'm not going to sit here and give you the empty but unrealistic platitude of, don't worry, things will eventually get better. Because I don't think that is ever really helpful advice. I mean, look, the good thing about bad times in your life is that they usually do not last forever. But man, that is something that you cannot see when you are in the depths of that difficult time. It's almost like telling someone who is going through a bout of grief or depression to go out and get fresh air and take a walk, as if that will miraculously fix everything. That to me is only moderately better and more polite than telling someone to just get over it. And if you're having a hard time believing that anybody would ever be so callous to say that, I use that as an example because someone said that to me once after they betrayed me, significantly, no less. So yeah, sometimes those things that we say to others when we see that they are hurting or struggling, even things that are not clearly dismissive like that was, are really not as helpful as we think they are. Healing from pain and disappointment is not like flipping a switch, even though when you're in the depths of that, you certainly wish that that was the way it worked. It takes time and processing the emotions that are associated with them. And it, of course, depends on what the disappointment was. So your mileage is always going to vary. As I already said, everyone is different. But one thing I do know is that when you look at it as something that has happened for you and not to you, it is so much easier to learn the lessons it was trying to teach you. Sitting on those feelings and figuring out what they mean are generally a good way to start that healing. That is, by the way, a very different action than dwelling on them. It is healthy to sit on feelings and process them so that you can heal from the situation. It is not healthy to dwell with no action or change. All that really does is, well, make you sad and make you ripe for the picking to settle into a victim mentality. That, my friends, is infinitely harder than anything else just about to get out of. It's for some people, it is their entire personality and lifestyle. Sometimes they aren't even aware of it, and then one day they look back and wonder why all of their new beginnings ultimately come to the same unhappy endings. I won't go into victim mentality in this video. I've covered it before, and maybe we'll do another one about it in the near future. But for the purposes of this video, here's an analogy I like to use when I think about the process of sitting with disappointments and other unpleasant emotions associated with a traumatic event. I think of those emotions as being the owner of a bicycle repair shop. When someone brings you a bicycle that is not functioning, the first thing that you need to do is figure out why. Once you figure that out, you repair and put that bicycle back on the road. Next, right? But what if you figure out what's wrong with the bicycle, but it's too daunting to fix, so you just put it in a corner and go on to a different one? And then you find out that one's complicated too. Maybe you find one that is easy, so you go do that one. Great. But you leave all those other ones in the dusty corner. More come in, then later, still more, and then what ends up happening, you are now overrun with broken bicycles. They are stacked so deep that you don't even have time or space to work in your shop anymore. It's only a matter of time before they all come crashing down, too. And with the collapse of heavy things like bicycles, you're bound to get hurt. So if one falls on your face and leaves you with a big-ass scar, you bet that one is going to change you permanently. The goal is not to let it get to that point. The goal is to not let the disappointments you have stacked up in a corner like those bicycles get out of hand, where it does change you into someone who is so jaded and afraid of betrayal and abandonment or whatever those negative feelings are that came about because of the betrayal, become the boss of you and start calling the shots and make the decisions. Putting them in charge is going to lead you down a very lonely path, friends. Ask me how I know. So, getting back to the message here, do disappointments really change you? Our final answer, yes. Yes, they do. but only if you let them. And while yes, abso-effing-lutely, sometimes that change is actually necessary in order to protect you. I mean, when you find yourself repeatedly being taken advantage of by people that you surround yourself with, maybe that's a lesson in disguise that you're too quick to trust the wrong people. When you keep attracting people who treat you poorly to be in a romantic relationship with, maybe it's not bad luck, maybe it's that you are not loving yourself enough to have some higher standards of what you want and deserve. When it comes to that in particular, I think that your self-esteem always pushes you to punch under your weight and not above it. We will discuss that in a future video too. But anyway, I think you get what I mean here. Lessons come around for a reason, because you need to learn them, and sometimes they come in packaging that is not obvious. When you look for that, when you look to see what you can get out of a situation that absolutely sucks for you, you'd be surprised to find that there is almost always a message in there that's important. So you've got to read it, you've got to think about it, you've got to take it in, you've got to listen, you've got to apply it. Then go on being you, but with better armor now. That isn't a permanent change. That isn't disappointment changing you per se, is it? That's disappointment actually evolving you for the better. And that's what we should all want for ourselves, right? To keep growing, to keep progressing, to keep moving forward, to get better, even if it's just one day at a time. That's all I've got for you this week. I'll be back next week with another priority message. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Bye.